yeah. So that all happened. Andor episode 6. Let's review it. Hey guys, so we have the newest episode of Andor, episode 6, and I gotta be honest, as I usually am, I wasn't all that impressed. I know a lot of you guys probably love this show, and you love the show, it's fine, but for me, I think that there are too many flaws, and this episode mainly was surprising in the sense that it wasn't a good kind of surprising. It wasn't a good kind of shocking. It was like, spoiler alert, everybody dies. Except Andor and Vel. Like all the characters we previously established in the last 2 episodes, the team, so Taramyn, Nemik, Skeen, Vel, Cinta, Lieutenant Gorn, and then Andor, all of them die except for Vel, Cinta, and Andor. And they don't die in like good ways. It literally is, well, we'll get to that later. I am going to do more of just a highlight video again like I did with the last one. I'm not really going to just walk through it just because, again, it is very tedious to walk through each scene by scene by scene when it is a slower paced show with very, intentionally deeper dialogue, so it's hard to break down. I will say the conversations in this show are fine. The conversations in this episode specifically I enjoyed. I thought the dialogue was pretty good. There were some well-used lines, so I appreciated that. And for the first, I would say third of this episode, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. We got, Andor and his team are still setting up to take down the garrison, or take the money from the garrison. The Aldani people, the people of that planet, the culture there, are coming to see the Eye, as they call it, the Eye of Aldani, that great event in the sky. And the Imperial guys are preparing for their arrival, and that's, of course, when Andor and his team are going to sneak in. So, yes, you have this Imperial officer named J-Hold, who is describing to the engineer that they've been talking about coming for the past 2 episodes, or I guess past 3 episodes at this point. He's describing to the engineer who has now arrived of how he's manipulated the Aldani people into doing what he wants them to do, and, just evil Imperial. He has a family, though. He has a wife and a son. Granted, he's a jerk to them both. But he still has them, and he still clearly has some care for them, as we see later. So, yes, Andor and his team prep. There wasn't a lot of diverging in this... There wasn't a lot of diverging in this episode in terms of, like we didn't see Inspector Karn. Luthen, again, only shows up one last tidbit at the end of this episode. Mon Mothma's in one scene toward the end, and it's like such a randomly placed scene. Like, I didn't understand why they put it there. It was so weird. Like, the stuff it was coming after, it didn't make sense with the rest of the story. It was just like, here's a Mon Mothma scene because we have to put it in there. I don't understand. Speaking of which, there's a lot about the show that I really just don't understand. So, Andor and his team infiltrate the base, finally. They gear up as Imperials, go undercover, and, pretend to be Imperials, going through the motions. As they're prepping to, getting closer and closer to strike, Vel and Cinta, like I said in the last video for the last episode, went off doing something else. Apparently they were going to do some James Bond underwater diving to get to where they need to go. It was weird because there was a moment where Andor, Taramyn, Nemik, and Skeen are all undercover as Imperial soldiers. Not stormtroopers, just Imperial soldiers. And they're all just standing in the same spot, waiting for Vel to give the signal that they've put the device on, I think it's the communications station outside the garrison, to, obviously block and prevent any communications from getting through to call help. any transmissions getting out, which there's even a flaw in that, in the sense that they put the device on there and it works for a little bit, but the guy inside the station ends up still being able to hear what's going on inside and finding out that rebels are attacking. So it's not like it really mattered. And you have this weird scene where Vel is like really scared of bungee jumping off the side of the bridge. Like, she's deathly terrified, and that's what's holding Andor and his crew up, his undercover crew. And I'm like, what if you've been planning for this whole mission the entire time? You figure you would be a little bit more prepared. You know, if you're like a rebel, if you're, you know that there are stakes and there are risks. It's just weird to me that the thing you would be scared of the most is just bungee jumping off a bridge. Like, that's the moment of tension. That's like, will Vel do it? Will she jump off the bridge? I don't care. They're gonna jump off the bridge. Like, Cinta's trying to get her, like, Vel, you gotta do this. Vel, you gotta do this. She's like, I don't want to do this. And she doesn't say that, but you just gotta see it in her face. And it's also funny because she's been the hardcore rebel leader this whole time, and all of a sudden now she's afraid of heights. I didn't understand that. Clearly, they weren't prepared that well for this mission. Clearly. I mean, the device they used didn't work. And in the last episode, they even mentioned it was a discussion of, like, they weren't exactly sure how to measure something in relation to getting the ship out of the garrison that they were going to escape on safely. I forget exactly what the debacle was, but they were talking to Andor about it, and Andor was like, you don't know this? You've been prepping for this mission for like weeks, and you don't know how to, you don't know this detail? And so clearly they were not prepared to the extent that they needed to be. And I think that's why Luthen brought Andor in the team in the first place, is because he knew that they would need one extra hand to even succeed at all, because he was going to call it off. And now we see why. And in fact, Andor ends up being crucial, because if he can't pilot the ship, and he was the first person to get to it in the first place later. So yeah. Anyway, all Donnie people come to the near the garrison to be at their temple to do a bunch of singing and dancing cultural stuff as the eye starts to happen, as all the meteors start to fly overhead. And you already got some beforehand, like these not small, but these singular ones coming before, like as a kind of, I guess, a calm before the storm. I guess a few precursors to the big finale of the Eye, which ends up actually looking pretty cool. When they actually end up escaping and you see all the meteors come in the, like, flying through the sky and all the different colors and the ships and the TIE fighters flying, it does look pretty neat. It's a pretty neat picture. But yes, all the Aldani people have come, and once Andor and his undercover crew are with the Imperial officer J-Hold and the engineer, with the J-Hold's family, they get inside the garrison, and that's when they choose their moment to strike. So that's when they, like, point the guns at them, like, get down, and or like put your hands on your heads, and, you know, surrender. And this is my, I think, maybe not my main criticism of this episode, but definitely up there, is they go a little too overboard with the do this. I guess the best way to explain it is they do things that usually the bad guys do, but the show seems to kind of want you to think, oh, well, they're the good guys, so that's okay, when it's not. Like, for instance, they keep yelling at him, like, do you get down, and like, do what we say and whatnot, which I can understand that. They're Imperials, they're jerks, you're trying to, you know, move the mission along. But there's a moment where Skeen has the wife and son, young son of the Imperial officer, J-Hold, and he got the blaster to them, like pointed at them. And then the engineer Imperial pulls a gun on, I believe it's Nimic, and he's like, release the boy. He doesn't even beg for his own life. He's just like, release the boy. Leave the boy alone. Just let the boy go. And they're all like, "Don't do this." So we do like, no. And Andor was like, "Nobody has to die." And I'm of the stance that this engineer guy is actually not being a doofus. Like, he's not being a jerk really, like, at all. Like, he's trying to get you guys to not potentially harm this child. And what's even worse is that during that scene, even as he's like, the engineer is screaming, "Release the boy, release the boy." Also, this is kind of just a very tense episode and kind of dark in the way it turns out. Like, it's very similar to what Mon Mothma's husband Perrin said in episode 4 when he's like, "Why must everything be boring and sad?" I've gotten a lot of vibes for the past 2 episodes. It's like, this is just kind of boring and sad, like Perrin said. But anyway, during that scene with the engineer and the kid, like Skeen has literally, he's the blaster is pointed at the kid's head directly. I'm not sure, like, I want to say at one moment he like actually like presses it against his head. I don't care what medium or media it is, Star Wars, Marvel, DC, I don't care. I think that's wrong. That is wrong. If you are the good guy, great example in The Dark Knight. Everybody loves The Dark Knight. For those of you who have seen it, which I imagine is many of you, you probably are aware, spoilers for the movie, that at the end of that movie, once Harvey Dent has fully become Two-Face, he captures Commissioner Gordon's family. And he has them at gunpoint. Like, he has Commissioner Gordon's wife and his son and daughter, and he's pointing the gun all at their faces. The whole time, the whole scene that he's having dialogue with Commissioner Gordon as he's holding his family hostage, he has this gun pointed at him, threatening to kill them the whole time. And he's even like taunting him, like, "Which one should I kill first?" That's, he's the bad guy. And of course Batman stops him, but he's the bad guy. That is like the most evil thing to do if you're a bad guy. These are the good guys. These are the protagonists. And yes, Skeen has been shown to be like the most brash, or one of the most brash of the team. Probably the most brash. And even shown to be mainly selfish later. But it's not like the team stops him. Like, I expected when Skeen did that the team would be, that one of the other team members would be like, "Hey, don't do that. That's wrong. We shouldn't do that." None of them said a word. They were just all yelling at the engineer, like, "Don't do this. Like, don't shoot anybody. Just put your gun down." He's trying to help the kid. He didn't even say, "Release us." Or at least he did not prioritize that above the boy. He was like, "Let the boy go." So I not like that at all. For me, when you threaten a child, the bad guy, it's intense enough when the bad guy does it. But when the good guys do it, and you don't call them out on that, that is a major, major beef for me. Major beef. Hated that scene. Hated it. Then, of course, Senta and Vel, once they finally get there, Senta just shoots the engineer out of nowhere, so the engineer's dead. So that was like, okay, so you just killed the guy who's trying to make sure the kid's okay. Like, yes, the Imperial officer's a jerk, but he has a family, the wife and son. Like, they shouldn't have to pay for his mistake. It's that same principle. It's been established in so many other forms of media. I just don't understand why it just passed through the writers' heads. Like, oh, this is a problem. I don't get that. Anyway, Vel is very intense. Like, she's saying like stuff like to the effect of like, "We'll cut off your hand if we have to get access to the credits." And they're going through all these things and being very bad guy-esque during all this. Like, they capture the family, and they even say to the Imperial officer, "If you don't do what we need you to do, or if you alert the Imperials in any way, we will kill your family." Now, granted, there's no guarantee that they actually would have, but I mean, considering that Skeen was gunpoint with the kid's head, I'm like, that's probably what they would have done. And yes, there's a theme about Andor in Rogue One where he's like, "I've done things that I wish I could forget." And like, this may be along the lines of them, even though he wasn't like directly pointing the gun at the kid or anything. This may be along the lines of that, but it's more so that the fact that the show doesn't acknowledge that these people are not, like, the rebels are not good rebels. And they're all just trying to steal money. And yes, stealing the payroll for the quarterly payroll for the Imperial sector would be devastating to that sector. But, like, is it worth all that? And you're all just doing this for, like, you're stealing a bunch of credits. I mean, like, yes, that sector would be damaged, but it's the Empire. I mean, it's the Emperor. He's got like a billions amounts of wealth. I mean, it would be no cost to him. It would. I don't know. It's just. It's a principle that they even explore this in Daredevil. It's a principle about where's the line, and how do you know when you're crossing it. Like, you should not have to play by the villain's rules in order to get the hero work done. Again, Daredevil explores that in great depth and very well. The kill, no kill rule, we shouldn't have to stoop ourselves down to the villain's level in order to achieve righteousness. But that's not what this show seems to be stating. It just seems to be having these rebels just doing the bad guy stuff. And it kind of gets worse, because they take J-Hold with them to get him to access the door so they can open the door and steal the credits that the credits are inside of. 80 million credits is what ends up being in the ship once they've escaped. Lot of money. Very large amount of cash, of dough, of Star Wars dough. They have placed the dude's family in a command center looking area, and they all have these like mask things around their mouths. I guess they're like supposed to be like the cloth that, you know, kidnappers wrap around people's mouths when they don't want them to talk. That's like the Star Wars equivalent of that. And Cinta stays there, disguised as an Imperial. And there was a moment where Vel had this intimate moment with her. And they were like with each other beforehand, but I still didn't really get what their relationship was. And they have this intimate moment in this episode, and I still don't really understand what their relationship is. Vel seems very concerned. She's like, please promise me you'll be alright. And Cinta's like, yes. Keep in mind, Cinta, we barely heard a single line of dialogue from her. Like, maybe like 3. It's been very minimal. And she's had almost no characterization, if at all. She's very quiet, and Skeen said in the last episode that she's the toughest one out of all of them. And that she lost her family to a bunch of stormtroopers, who apparently Tamarin was once a stormtrooper. So she's barely given any characterization. So like when she has that moment with Vel, you're like, what? Okay. Vel apparently, she cares very deeply about Cinta. I don't know what history that is. Anyway, Vel says that. She leaves. And, you know, we'll get to the Cinta thing later. But it's actually a criticism that I had with the first 3 episodes, is that they were not explaining things well enough. At least not for me. You guys may have read these scenes perfectly. You may have watched them and been like, hey, that's what that means. I totally understand that. For me, it's not like that at all. There are several scenes that I have no idea what the meanings of them are. Like, so many of the Mon Mothma scenes. In fact, I think all of the Mon Mothma scenes, except for this one, I understand the main effect in this episode, and then the scene with her and Luthen in episode 4, which again is still the best episode by far of the 6 so far. We are halfway through the series, and I feel like Andor's barely gone through any actual character development, and I don't know if any actually, and we've barely gotten any political thriller stuff other than her and Luthen just talking in episode 4 about the inner circle, who she still has not mentioned the guy she was talking about yet, or he's not been brought up again, he or she, the person that she wanted to bring into the inner political circle. No show. She hasn't, unless the man in the last episode that her husband was talking about, I forget his name exactly. I think it's Tafid. His last name's Tafid. Maybe he's it, but we haven't even come back to that. And again, like this is the 6th episode. Halfway through the series, more should be accomplished, and I feel like they've wasted so much time on pointlessness in the first 6 episodes when you could have been doing so much more interesting things, focusing more on Mon Mothma, the political thriller. You could have introduced her in the very first episode, or at least the second. Go ahead and establish that first. Instead, they decided to wait till episode 4, and then barely do anything with her in the episode 5 and 6. You have the important stuff in episode 4 about her and Luthen, and then her scene with her husband, which that one, sets the tone enough about that whole situation. And then in episode 5, you have the scene with her daughter, which is like, okay. I needed way more context for that scene. I even rewatched it before doing the video, and I was like, I still barely have a clue what they're trying to convey here. And then you have the scene with them in the speeder going to some place that I thought they were going to be like going over in the next episode, but apparently in the next episode she's at the Senate, so that's completely unrelated. She's at the Senate in this one talking about the oppression of the Gormans, which she mentioned the Gormans earlier in episode 4. In an earlier episode 4. She was like mad at her husband about inviting people who were oppressing the Gormans by cutting off shipping lanes to them, which means the Gormans starve. I guess they're a specific alien species, or a planet of people, obviously. And like in the scene, she's in the Senate chamber, which is like the Senate chamber, the one where Yoda battles Sidious in Revenge of the Sith. And if I'm being honest, the look of the Senate chamber looked weirdly bad, at least to me. It looked kind of painted, or like somebody drew, like it did not look like a 3D space. Like I think that even the CGI in the prequels, and that was the Revenge of the Sith was 2005, so this is like 17 years ago almost. And I think that CGI for that Senate building, the Senate chamber, looked better than this one in 2022. Again, it just looked drawn. I didn't understand it. And I already noticed by the beginning of the scene, like, there's a lot more empty seats in the Senate chamber than there usually are. Which I think is probably foreshadowing of the fact that Sidious ends up just dissolving the Senate anyway. Like, there is no Senate by the time of episode 4. And when Mon Mothma is talking about the oppression of the Gormans, everybody just starts leaving. So I assume that was meant to evoke that nobody cares what Mon Mothma has to say, and she's starting to realize that she just needs to be the leader of the rebellion instead of trying to be a political activist when literally no one cares and no one gives a mess about what she's trying to say about the oppression that the Empire's putting on people. And I was trying to see if I could find Palpatine like in the center seat of the chamber, like where he usually is. I think I did see a guy, but he looked like just maybe like a regular dude, so I wasn't really sure. I had hopes that maybe they would allow the Emperor. I mean, I know big cameo if it would be, but I feel like it would make sense. Like that's the cameo that would make sense for this show, if you actually had the Emperor in the Senate chamber and Mon Mothma saying stuff. You could get Ian McDiarmid to, I mean, it'd be a small cameo. You only have to do it for maybe like one episode. I mean, I'll prefer more, but if you had to, you could just do it for one episode. But it is kind of funny that they seem to avoid that in this one scene. Although, if we're being honest, I don't even know if this scene should have been the episode in the first place, because it doesn't make any sense in the context of all the stuff that's happened. Back to Andor and his team. They're getting the credits out. Lieutenant Gorn comes from behind them and starts talking to the J-Hold. And J-Hold realizes that Gorn was the traitor. Gorn betrayed them, and J-Hold's like, "You'll pay for this," or he says you'll hang for this. And Gorn's like, "Well, after all the years I've worked for you, I deserved a lot worse." And so, that's a nice redemptive arc for Gorn. But already at this point, J-Hold looks like he's just exhausted, because they're making him, they're pushing all the officers like, "Move this credits and help us move these credits and do it now, do it now, do it now." And they're pushing this dude. And then once the Imperial at the transmissions station outside the garrison realizes that there's been like there's a disturbance inside the garrison. Once he comes inside with some other troopers, he sees J-Hole and how tired he is and like that he's in pain. And Lieutenant Gordon's like talking to J-Hole. He's like, tell him that everything's okay. Tell him now. And then J-Hole, he dies. At least that's the way it looked to me. I'm pretty sure that's what that was. Like, he didn't pass out. I'm pretty sure that was like a heart problem and he died. So I think that was meant to say that he was, like, they overworked him. Like, them pushing him so hard to, like, move credits that they were stealing has now killed the man. And, again, I don't like that. I feel like that's what the bad guys do. The bad guys are the ones who are demanding, overworking people kind of guys. They're the ones who are, like, behind people's backs saying, get to work, do this. And now the good guys have done it, and they just essentially killed this guy. And once the actual Imperials see that, they just all end up firing on him. And then Gordon dies. Okay. You have that whole setup for, you know, he seems to have this redemptive arc, and it was mentioned in one of the earlier episodes that he had this, you know, he fell in love with a woman on the planet. The Empire didn't like that. Something about all that to where that caused him to fall out of love with the Empire, realize that they were evil because of this emotional connection that he developed with this woman on the planet. And you have that whole storyline, and now he's just dead. And I don't even know if anybody says or yells out, like, Gorn, or, oh no, Gorn. It's not even anything. It's just, oh, he's dead. Nobody seems to be that concerned. It's like, oh, Gordon's too good. Hey, Gordon just got shot. Okay. And then, you know, firefight ensues. Tamarin and Skeen are taking cover. And Nemec is too. And then Andor's gone into the ship to try to get it ready. And then Tamarin tells Skeen, like, cover me. And Skeen starts to shoot, but you could tell he's very hesitant. Like, he doesn't want to shoot because you could tell he's fearing for his life currently. Even though he's like he's been the gruff rebel this whole time who's been talking a big game, and now he's all scaredy cat and can't even manage to cover for his friend. And so Tamarin runs after saying that, hoping that Skeen will cover him, rightfully so. And then Skeen shoots, like, he shoots a little bit, but then he backs off because he's too scared. And then they shoot Tamarin, and Tamarin's dead. I really did question as I was watching the episode, like, wait, they're dead? So Gorn died. No one seemed to care. And now Tamarin's dead. And they have a little moment once they leave where Nemec is like, where's Tamarin? And then Tamarin's on the ground dead. And then they have, like, this somber music for, like, 0.5 seconds. It's like, oh no, and then they leave. It's just, I care and I don't care. I care about the fact that these characters died because I thought the show wanted me to. But now you make me not care because you've completely negated the fact that they were important. You set up the stuff about these characters, like the fact that Tamarin was a stormtrooper, and that's why he's ordering people around all the time, he's very authoritative, and he's a soldier, just because he used to be a stormtrooper. And, you know, you give these characters this development, and then they just die. A common criticism with Rogue One is that you weren't able to get attached to the characters enough to be sad when they died. I have always disagreed with that. I thought you get attached to those characters, most of them, very well by the end of the movie. Especially Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus. All of those characters definitely earned our love as characters. But these characters, they're kind of, there's not a lot of, like, Nemec and Skeen are the ones that have, like, stuff to them. Everybody else is just kind of one note in personality. It's just like they haven't set up enough. They haven't done the proper. And just because you spend more time with characters doesn't mean that automatically gives you the best and greatest setup for if they're gonna die. Because their deaths aren't even played like a noble sacrifice. Nemec says, because Nemec dies later, he dies too. Because when they leave the ship, once Andor punches the throttle and flies out of there, the one of the box kicks back from the jolt and crushes Nimik. And Nimik lives just long enough to tell Andor how to get out of the eye, and then the TIE fighters end up getting destroyed in the process. Also, what was funny about the TIE fighters is that the Imperials were only just figuring out that the Rebels were even there. Like, the one guy in the transmission station was he was worried, but he wasn't fully aware. But even before that, as like we see everything going down, like the pilots are getting in the TIE fighters and preparing for something. Maybe they were preparing for. Maybe the Imperial transmissions guy thought, like, maybe he was smart. Maybe he was like, if I'm getting these like signals that there might be something going down, should have some TIE fighters ready in case some bad guys some rebels try to leave. And so that's the only explanation I can think of, because it is just weird that the pilots would already be getting in the ships ready to go when they don't even know that there's a threat yet. But there just happened to be one when the ship flew out into the eye. I was like, okay, that doesn't make much sense. And so yeah, they leave. Nimik gets crushed. They finally get out of the eye. Now it's only Skeen, Andor, Vel, and Nimik, because Cinta stayed behind. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't think that was part of the plan, at least originally. That explains more so why Vel was so concerned about her, because clearly she knew that Cinta would have to stay there. But I didn't really get that. I was kind of like, okay. I don't remember you guys mentioning anything about that. Like, why are you leaving Cinta behind? She probably could have gotten on the ship if she, ran fast enough. Maybe the guys, since she was already in the Imperial getup, might have thought she was an Imperial until it was too late, until she was already on the ship. So it's just funny to me that I don't really recall them establishing that she had to stay there, or why she even had to stay there. And now I have no idea what she's going to do, because I don't know if she has a ship and everybody else is dead. So I don't know if anybody else can help her. Also, during that whole thing, maybe not, I don't know if it's the firefight, but it's before the eye starts. We've got all the intensity with them, trying to get the credits, and it keeps cutting to the Aldani people doing these chants and these like dances to celebrate the eye, and it just felt very weird to me. It was kind of jarring. It's like we're going from this intense, like, hey, the rebels are capturing the Imperials and they're telling them to do all this stuff because they're trying to get the credits, and then we got the Aldani cultural people dancing around and saying chants and burning goat skins and like, what? And I don't even know what the purpose of that was. I mean, I guess you could have had one scene with that just to show them, to world building, to show some culture there. But you didn't need to keep cutting back, because by the end of it, they just all see the eye, and it's like, oh, okay. So, like, I thought they might have been leading up to something else, like maybe somehow them doing all that stuff, like maybe they were planning a revolt. I thought they might be planning a revolt based on some of the stuff that the leader of their tribe, I guess, was saying. It seemed like they might be planning to try and overthrow the Empire, but no, it was just like, hey, we did all this and there's the eye, and I guess that was just what that was for, even though we already knew the eye was coming. Flash forward. Everybody else is dead except Cinta. Cinta's stuck on the planet. Andor escapes with Skeen, Nimik, and Vel. Vel is convinced that Nimik is going to die, and she doesn't want to go to a doctor that they've apparently already hired for that purpose in case the mission went south. She doesn't want to go to the doctor because she feels that might jeopardize the mission, because they still got to get the credits to I don't know where exactly, but to wherever they have to get them to. I don't believe they mentioned it. Anyway, Vel is apprehensive to the idea of getting Nimik to the doctor, and Skeen is very adamant that they should. Skeen's like, this kid is the whole reason we're here, because they've even gone over this kid, like his motivations. Like, he's written down this manifesto of, we talked about in the last video, of like the political machine that the Empire uses to oppress people and get people to fear them. And he has all these philosophies about the Empire and their oppression, and his main motivation to stand up to it. And so Skeen makes the probably truthful argument that Nemik is the reason they're there in the first place, because he was so devout in his beliefs. And it's a very noble moment, actually. I really enjoyed watching Skeen kind of stand up for Nemik, and even though he was kind of mean to him in the previous episodes, I thought it was kind of a cool character moment. I was like, hey, he's standing up for his friend. I like that. And then they ruin it, because apparently on the drop of a dime, when they get to the Doctor, and the Doctor's like this alien with 4 arms, but his head slightly looks like a human. Interesting. The Doctor's working on Nemik, because Nemik's passed out at this point, trying to save his life. And Skeen is talking to Andor outside the tent, and Vel's inside the tent, watching the Doctor work on Nemik. And Skeen and Andor are outside the tent, and Skeen starts talking to Andor. He's like, hey, let's split the credits. There's 80 million in the transport. Let's just go 40 million apiece. I know a moon nearby that we can go to and lay low and just, win and walk away, like you said, Andor. How about that? And it's just weird, because he was the guy who was just saying, hey, let's go save this kid. It's really important. And now he just wants to leave them behind. And apparently he, at least as I understood it, never had a brother. Like that whole story about his brother in the last episode, what little plot the last episode moved along. Like this episode, episode 6, to me, completely signified the fact that the last episode was almost entirely pointless. Like this episode killed most of its characters that they had all that build up for in the last one. It's terrible payoff. Terrible. It's not even a payoff. They don't just die. Except for Vel and Cinta. It's just like, okay. Nemik is the only one who has an actual, sacrifice-esque kind of thing. Like, you actually remember the fact that he died later. It's like, oh yeah, that kid was nice. He had a good philosophy. His motivations were true, and he had a pure heart. I'm just kind of sad that he's dead. And I'm sad that the others are dead, too. It's just funny that he's really the only one that gets the recognition. But yeah, Skeen's talking to Andor like, hey, let's split the winnings. And the whole story about him having a brother in the last episode who was oppressed by the Empire and drowned himself because the Empire flooded his farm was hogwash, because apparently he didn't have a brother. And what's funny is Andor doesn't even seem alarmed by that. He's just kind of like, so you're just going to leave him here? Like, he doesn't even seem to be alarmed by the fact that, oh, so that whole thing you told me was a lie. And you're not actually here for any cause. You're just a rebel because you want money. It's just, I think it is terrible character development. You have these moments that seem slightly redemptive with Skeen, even though granted he is the one holding the gun to the kid later, so maybe he deserved it. But you have those slightly redemptive moments with him, and he's talking later about we gotta save Nemik, we gotta save this kid. This kid is a good kid, we gotta save him. And now he's like, let's just leave him. I don't care. Dies, he doesn't die, let's just leave him and go spend money. I don't know, maybe he used the whole plight for saving Nemik just as a way to get separated from Vel long enough to convince Andor to get out of there and take their winnings. Maybe he was always just a selfish jerk. I don't know. And then Andor kills him. And he doesn't even threaten, Skeen, there's no threatening on Skeen's part. It's just Skeen saying, hey, if you leave with me, I'll give you 40 million credits and forget I ever saw you, or forget you ever existed. We'll just part ways. We can celebrate the winnings. Celebrate the money. And then, out of nowhere, again, I guess this show does get points for being unpredictable, because out of nowhere, Andor just pulls a gun out and blasts him. Really fast, too, so he's a quick draw. Quick draw McGraw would be proud. Skeen is dead. And that was all pointless. All of it. No, it made no sense whatsoever. Whole story about his brother. He doesn't have a brother. He's selfish. He tried to save Nimik, but he's selfish now, so he's dead. And that even seemed wrong for Andor to do that, because he killed another person in cold blood. Because he killed the first guy in episode 1, even though he did just shake him down, and that one did make a lot more sense, because if he had left him alive, it would have incriminated Andor even more. But either way, they found him, so it ended up not mattering. And then now it's like literally just flat out in cold blood. The main bad thing that Skeen did was, betray his friends. But I don't think that's grounds... Like, him wanting to leave with his winnings, I don't think that's grounds for immediate murder. Maybe Andor thought that Skeen would have murdered him if Andor refused, and so Skeen was trying to cover his tracks so Vel wouldn't find out he was trying to betray him. I don't know. I'm starting to not care. It's just, when you have these sudden jumps in story writing, like, you're supposed to care about this, but now it's just gone, then you just do away with it. It's like, what? Andor walks in the tent, and then, they discover Nimik's dead. And then he's got the blaster pointed at Vel. I guess because... I don't know. I guess because of all the stuff that happened with Skeen, he was afraid that she was going to betray him too. He gives her back the Kyber Crystal so she can give it back to... The Kyber Crystal necklace so she could give it back to Luthen. And she gives Andor Nimik's manifesto, because Nimik said he wanted Andor to have it. That was a nice moment. I did think that was well written, that whole idea. I was like, okay, Nimik was a big believer in this philosophy. His request, if he died, was that Andor, who he was talking to about all this mess and was really hopeful, would just start believing the cause instead of just being in it for the money. He would give him the manifesto. I was like, okay, cool. Because Andor even says it first, like, I don't want it, but Vel's like, Nimik insisted. So she gives it to him. Fine. Great. Awesome. It just, so much of it just rings hollow now. Because you planned all that character development just to have him die in not very meaningful ways. Save Nimik for getting them out of the eye. They don't even do anything that heroic in their deaths. It's just they get shot. And then Skeen is now a jerk. Like, officially a jerk, and he's trying to leave him. And he didn't have a brother, he was in it for the money. Now he's dead. Okay. Then it cuts to the ISB guys on Coruscant. I assume they've just heard about the rebel attack, because one of the guys in Luthen's shop later says it's all over the news, which I guess Star Wars has news. Or he says it's all the news, so maybe not. Maybe Star Wars doesn't have actual news TV, but it's like word around town. And so I assume that's why the ISB called this emergency gathering. He says it's not a meeting, but he also says that they're not going to be able to go home for a very long time because they got to get these plans ready in case more rebel insurgencies happen. At least that's what it's sounding like to me, because I guess they heard about what happened on Aldhani, and so they're like, hey, we got to be prepared in case there's more bad stuff coming our way. And then it cuts to Luthen, and his assistant girl is reviewing with the customer these necklaces, and the customer's like, oh, that's a pretty blue, and then the assistant's like, that's a Deveron blue. And Deveron is actually a planet located, strangely enough, in the Deveron system that was featured in Clone Wars twice. First, it was when Balo Rapal, one of the Jedi, they called him the Keeper of the Kyber Crystal, which could be combined with a holocron to reveal a bunch of Force sets of Jedi younglings around the galaxy. And Balo Rapal was on that planet, stationed on that planet during the Clone War, and Cad Bane came and captured him with the Separatists. So that was the first mention of that planet in the Clone Wars. And then the second time was later in Clone Wars in Season 3. Savage Opress, for his first assignment under Count Dooku, attacked a bunch of clones on that planet as the Separatists were trying to defeat the clones and the Jedi at a Jedi temple on Deveron. And of course, Savage came in there, Darth Maul's brother, came in there and just wiped the clones out and wiped the Jedi out. So that is where we've heard Deveron previously. And I did think it was a funny Easter egg that was featured in this episode. May have been the best part of this episode, if we're being honest. But then another one of the customers at his shop asks Luthen if he has anything from Aldhani. And of course, Luthen's like, why would you ask me that? Just because, only in his mind, he's like, I have rebels on Aldhani. Was there a correlation? And of course there is, because the customer's like, well, it's all the news around town that there's been a rebel attack at Aldhani, a major one. And then Luthen, like, under the cover of saying, hey, let me check if there's any antiquities I have from Aldhani, he goes in his back room and just starts laughing and being happy that the mission happened. And I guess it was a success. Yeah, sure, it was a success. Major casualties, but it was a success. And he starts laughing to himself, and then there's just a sigh of relief. And I hate it, because that would have been a great ending to the episode if so much of the previous stuff did not ring hollow. If so much of the previous stuff was like, hey, this character can get redemptive or, celebratory moment. This character can get a redemptive celebratory moment. All of the characters can get redemptive celebratory moments. And this episode is exemplifying of, I think, the distinctly wrong thing about this show. And a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on this. I already said I was the fan service guy. And I'm not saying there needs to be fan service in this show. But along those same lines, I am the fan service guy. So I gravitate more towards Star Wars stuff that I know. True Star Wars. Star Wars in its purest form. Star Wars as we've always known it. Star Destroyers, Stormtroopers, Jedi, lightsabers, TIE Fighters, you name it. The stuff in the original trilogy, the stuff in the prequel trilogy, that's my Star Wars. And this show has, I think, purposefully stripped away a lot of those elements in an attempt to be different. And I think it could have worked if they didn't strip away the fundamental thing that makes Star Wars what it is. At least that's what I read from this episode, and that is there's not any hope. There's not any lighter side to it. Even in Rebels, there was moments where characters would be like, we really had a bad day, or maybe we lost someone, or we had a devastating defeat. But they had each other. And so there was hope in that. And even in Rogue One, that message is underlying. Like, they're looking out for each other's backs. And when one dies, it matters. They, take it in, but they need to keep moving, but you know that they're sad about it. And you know that they respect them as, brothers and sisters of the rebellion. And just this episode rang hollow for me because it wasn't like that at all. It was like, okay, everybody dies and we don't care. This guy's in it for the money. This girl's too rigid. Nimic's the main one who seemed to care about the team as a whole. And care about the people rather than just the mission. And yeah, so everybody dies pointlessly, and so there's not the hope. There's not the lighter side. And George Lucas specifically has stated that Star Wars is actually meant for kids. So it's kind of weird if you kind of take the kid element out of Star Wars, because that's what it meant for. So that it doesn't really work that well. At least a certain kid element to it. Maybe not. I'm not talking toddler, but preteen, I think, at the most. You don't need the language. You don't need the attempted sex scenes. I say attempted because that's essentially what it was in episode 2. You don't need that stuff. It's not necessary. It doesn't add anything to the story. It's just trying to make it more mature. When in actuality, that has nothing to do with maturity. It just has to do with crap. And, this episode, there's really no good guys except for Nimic. Not actually good people. Or at least Gorn. Gorn is. Gorn, I think, retains a large part of his good guyness, but then he just dies. So much of it rang hollow. And at this point, I think I'm actually more excited for She-Hulk, or have been more excited for She-Hulk than Andor. It's because Andor has been either boring, or now it's depressing. Oh boy, I'm kind of tired of crappy media these days, so I really need Black Adam to be good. I will hopefully be doing a review for you guys for that movie once it comes out. I'm looking forward to that one. And I need Wakanda Forever to be good. I will also be doing a review for that movie as well. I need that one to be good. And of course, Tales of the Jedi is the one I'm most excited for the rest of this whole year. Tales of the Jedi is what I'm clinging on. It's what I'm gravitating towards, what I'm hopeful for to be the best thing ever. You know why? Because it has the golden touch of Dave Filoni. I'm quickly discovering that a Star Wars project cannot truly be great Star Wars if it is not made or have had at least a little bit of relation to Dave Filoni. I'm discovering that with Andor. Kenobi didn't really have a lot of Dave Filoni in it, if not just a few suggestions. And I like Kenobi, but I also acknowledge that it has a lot of flaws, and Andor has just not hit it home for me, so I'm in Filoni-verse. I liked Book of Boba Fett enough. Again, I acknowledge some of the flaws are there too. I love Mandalorian, and Clone Wars is phenomenal, and Rebels is phenomenal. I just recently rewatched Clone Wars with my family, and it still holds up. It's still great. Every project has flaws, but I mean, the stuff that Filoni touches, he just gives it a deeper meaning and a deeper sense of hope, and just it makes you feel like there's something worth fighting for in this world. Which is how content should be. It's how media should be. It should make you feel things to how to react to real stuff. It shouldn't have real stuff in the medium. At least not Star Wars shouldn't. Other stuff, obviously, for the nature of the project, you need real stuff. But in Star Wars, I feel like there is a line, with the reality line. Don't cross it. Because there is always going to be that sense of, we just need hope today. We need an escape. I want to watch some Star Wars, and I want to have fun watching Star Wars. And I want to smile watching Star Wars. You can even smile during Empire Strikes Back. Just if it gives you a smile, even though, yes, the bad guys win in that movie, but at the end of the movie, it still ends with, fun fact, I'm pretty sure the ending scene of Empire Strikes Back was actually a reshoot. They originally had planned to end the movie before that, with the villains just winning and that being that, but George wanted to add this scene in there because he didn't want it to end on a sour note. Because it was hopeful. Because it was this moment where, you know, hey, Han got captured, but Lando and Chewie are going to save him. And Luke has a robot hand. Luke still has Leia, and C-3PO and R2 are still there. Like, there's still hope. We still have each other, and we have the Force, and we can still win. Not all hope is lost. Even if they're into Revenge of the Sith, which is arguably the saddest movie in the whole saga. Still, you have the ending scene where Yoda says, hey, I'm going to teach you how to commune with Qui-Gon. I'm going to show you how to become a Force ghost. Then you have the scene where Obi-Wan gives Luke to Owen and Beru. And before that, when Organa and his wife were cradling baby Leia, and like loving the fact that, hey, we have a daughter now. That is hopeful. That makes you feel good. It makes you feel things, despite the fact that there was such a major loss, despite the fact that all the Jedi died, despite the fact that Vader completely won. Cloud City was taken over and Han was captured by Boba Fett. Despite all of that, there was hope to be gleaned from. There was light to be found. I just didn't get that with this episode. No vibes. So, that's my review for Andor Episode 6. We will continue to be hopeful nonetheless for some good episodes to come, but right now I'm not loving this show. Unfortunately. Next up, the She-Hulk finale. Oh, we need to pray. Thank you guys for watching. Have a very blessed day. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. Praise the Lord for good content. And goodbye. Goodbye. Always need to do that. That's a wrap.